Welcome to the Clarin Ratio Daily World Brief, available at clarinratio.com. Today is Friday, July 3, 2026. If you were just standing on the docks of Bandar Abbas on Iran's southern coast today, you would feel this thick, sweltering summer heat. But you would also see local fishermen finally unloading their catch.
You've got one guy hauling up baby sharks tangled in his nets and another strapping these two massive fish to a motorbike. It almost looks like an ordinary, quiet fishing port.
Except this is the Strait of Hormuz. So those small fishermen returning to the water actually serve as a highly localized human gauge for the fragile ceasefire that's currently holding between the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
Which presents a really sharp contrast to the massive commercial vessels anchored just offshore. Because as of the episode date, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is still holding ships like the MSC Francesca and the Epaminondas, which they seized back in April.
And that waterway handles, what, a fifth of global oil and gas?
A full fifth, yeah. Following the U.S. and Israeli strikes back in February, the ones that killed Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the strait was effectively rendered impassable. So this ceasefire allows a tiny bit of normalcy to return, but Iranian authorities are also bracing for what they're calling the funeral of the century.
So you were talking about the public mourning and the massive funeral procession moving from Tehran to his hometown of Mashhad next Thursday.
That's the one. They expect up to 20 million people to mobilize for this, which is happening just as his son, Mujtaba Khamenei, takes over as supreme leader.
Mobilizing 20 million people is just staggering from a logistical standpoint, but there's a jarring contrast here between that high-level geopolitical chess and the immediate human toll. We often talk about military blockades as these abstract strategies, but look at the recent reporting from Kushnudi Street in Bandar Abbas,
where the apartment block was hit by an Israeli strike,
leaving half the building in ruins and 3 people dead. Or consider Fatima, a 55-year-old vendor in the local market who is selling peaches because her son lost his job to the war. She stated plainly that they live in constant fear of bombings and never wanted this conflict. How does a ceasefire hold when the local populace is enduring such devastating physical and economic realities?
Well, that tension between street-level suffering and state-level objectives is the core of Iran's asymmetric warfare doctrine. Tehran knows they cannot match the conventional military might of the United States or Israel, so they turn their geography into their primary weapon. The Strait of Hormuz is their ultimate leverage point.
Because choking off a fifth of the world's energy supply creates immediate, painful economic consequences globally.
It means spiking insurance premiums, forcing ships to reroute all the way around Africa, and driving up inflation in Western supermarkets. The ceasefire holds right now precisely because that leverage is so potent. Neither side wants the economic fallout of a permanently closed strait.
Making that massive funeral mobilization for Ayatollah Ali Khamenei more than just a period of mourning. Logistically, moving millions of people across the country serves as an enormous display of state capacity and public unity for the new leadership.
For Mujtaba Khamenei, managing that transition smoothly signals to domestic citizens and international adversaries that the regime's command structure remains totally intact, even under the pressure of Western strikes.
State capacity in Iran relies on rigid top-down control. But looking at the United States as it marks its 250th anniversary this weekend reveals a system facing a completely different kind of institutional stress. Financial disclosures released earlier this week show President Donald Trump reported $2.2 billion in income during his first year back in office.
And roughly $1.1 billion of that came directly from his crypto ventures, right? Businesses like World Liberty Financial.
Meaning he is selling governance tokens and meme coins stamped with his image. For anyone unfamiliar, a governance token essentially gives the holder voting rights over a financial protocol's future, while a meme coin is just a highly speculative digital asset driven entirely by internet culture.
And the public reaction detailed in the sources shows profound concern over corruption. Middle-class voters are expressing genuine disgust as they struggle with inflation, while the White House just flatly denies any conflicts of interest.
Which is happening concurrently with the Supreme Court recently granting the president near-blanket legal immunity, along with the authority to fire heads of independent federal agencies. It feels like an unprecedented blending of private enterprise and public office.
It creates a massive structural stress test for American democracy. Legal scholars point out that a constitution is not a self-executing document. It relies entirely on human actors. By granting that immunity and removing barriers to firing agency heads, the judicial branch is concentrating authority in the executive while removing traditional avenues of oversight.
I read this recent Guardian op-ed that used a fascinating analogy for this. The founders built the U.S. Constitution like an intricate antique grandfather clock. The entire mechanism is designed to run on friction. One branch of government pushing against another to prevent any single gear from spinning out of control.
But if the people running the machine refuse to engage the gears, the whole thing stalls.
If Congress refuses to act as a counterweight, and the Supreme Court removes the legal friction, the clockwork stops functioning as designed. Selling crypto tokens that foreign actors could potentially purchase to curry favor while holding the highest office tests those gears in ways that the founders never imagined.
Assessing that structural shift does require acknowledging the enduring economic and military might of the U.S. They continue to dominate global markets and hold a massive advantage in AI. However, the civic stakes of a leader treating the presidency as a profit center involve the fundamental erosion of public trust.
When the boundary between public duty and private wealth dissolves, voters perceive that the government's primary focus has shifted toward elite enrichment rather than public welfare.
And a republic can boast massive economic output, but if the citizenry believes the system is inherently rigged, that civic rot becomes a profound vulnerability.
That same erosion of trust, where citizens feel disconnected from the priorities of their leaders, is currently tearing through Europe's largest democracy as well. The German coalition government just announced this 34-point reform package intended to modernize their stagnant economy.
This is the package pushed by the CDU, CSU, and the SPD, which includes about $11.4 billion in tax relief.
The very same package, but it also features a deeply controversial mandate ending phone-based sick notes. Currently, German workers can simply call in sick for minor illnesses, but this new rule requires a medical certificate from a doctor from day one.
Which doctors are furious about. They are calling the sick note ban a massive wave of bureaucracy that will just flood their waiting rooms with people suffering from minor infections, actively preventing them from treating serious cases.
And the public reaction is stark. 86% of voters are dissatisfied with the coalition, and the far-right populist party, the AfD, is currently polling at a leading 27%.
Meanwhile, the German government is simultaneously purchasing a 40% stake in the European tank maker KNDS, worth roughly $6.8 billion, equalizing its share with France.
For more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarinoratio.com. But looking at these two policies side by side reveals severe political whiplash. The government is pinching pennies and policing everyday workers' sick days, which average about 18 per year in Germany, while writing a multi-billion-dollar check to buy a tank manufacturer.
It sends a deeply conflicting message to a populace already anxious about the cost of living, but you have to look at the dual, conflicting pressures bearing down on Berlin. Domestically, there is a desperate push to revive an economy facing 7 years of stagnation and a demographic crisis where an aging population is crushing the pension system.
So the strict new sick note policies are an attempt to squeeze more productivity out of the existing workforce and reduce employer costs. Even though a sick worker coming into an office simply infects the rest of the staff, lowering overall productivity anyway.
But the tank acquisition stems from a completely different mandate. KNDS produces the German Leopard 2 and the French Leclerc battle tanks. By matching France's ownership, Berlin is signaling a massive commitment to a sovereign European defense strategy that is increasingly independent of the United States.
The geopolitical investments are driven by an existential necessity to secure the continent's borders, even if the domestic policies feel punitive to the average worker. But hardening military borders does absolutely nothing to protect citizens from a rapidly escalating physical threat, bypassing those borders entirely, which is extreme lethal weather.
The mortality numbers are devastating. France recorded an additional 2,025 deaths in the last week of June alone, as temperatures neared 41 degrees Celsius, or roughly 105 Fahrenheit. Belgium recorded over 1,200 excess deaths during the heat wave, predominantly among those 85 and older.
And the environmental impact is equally severe, with nearly 7,000 wildfires igniting in France since the start of summer. In Germany, 89% of citizens are now actively demanding more infrastructure investment to protect against these heat waves.
Europe actually stands as the fastest warming continent on Earth, heating up twice as fast as the global average, and the physical infrastructure of European cities is actively working against its residents.
Because cities across Europe were built hundreds of years ago to retain heat during freezing winters, not to survive 105-degree summers. You often hear weather discussed as a background event, just conditions happening around us, but these mortality numbers resemble the casualties of a localized conflict.
Urban areas with dense concrete and a severe lack of green space create these heat islands that trap temperatures, turning older, poorly ventilated apartments into ovens. This is no longer just an environmental issue, it is a profound public health and infrastructure failure.
When the vast majority of these excess deaths are the elderly, it forces a societal reckoning about how we care for our most vulnerable. Adapting requires completely rethinking how cities are built and managed.
You cannot just install millions of air conditioning units because that would instantly overload the existing power grids and pump more heat out into the streets.
Urban planners are forced to look at retrofitting buildings for passive cooling designing structures with smart windows, natural airflow corridors, and reflective materials that deflect solar radiation without relying on electricity.
So the physical environment is forcing a reactive scramble, but the digital perception of global events is being actively and intentionally distorted at the exact same time by synthetic media. The 2026 World Cup is seeing a massive flood of viral AI deepfakes designed specifically to push political narratives.
Like the fabricated image of an Iranian player protesting with a pink backpack, which co-opts a real protest regarding a U.S. military strike. Or the fake image of UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer wearing a rival Croatia jersey.
There is even completely fabricated video footage claiming to show the opening ceremony in Mexico City. The danger is not just that the fakes exist, it is how seamlessly they integrate into our dopamine loops.
Comparing these AI fakes to a digital virus feels highly accurate because they specifically target the brain's emotional receptors. Recent studies analyzing short-form video algorithms suggest these platforms act as supercomputers pointed directly at the human brainstem, prioritizing outrage and engagement entirely over reality.
That algorithmic manipulation is rooted deeply in human neurochemistry. As users scroll through infinite feeds, they experience reward desensitization. The brain adapts to the constant stimulation, requiring increasingly extreme or emotionally triggering content to achieve the same chemical response.
Geopolitical actors understand this psychological vulnerability perfectly. By injecting highly sophisticated, emotionally charged synthetic media into a unifying global sporting event like the World Cup, they turn a shared cultural moment into a weaponized delivery system for political propaganda.
The technology bypasses critical thinking and directly activates tribalism, creating a highly volatile information environment. Looking across these diverse developments reveals several distinct pressures pulling societies in conflicting directions. We have unwritten norms struggling to constrain a 250-year-old constitution in the U.S., aging urban infrastructure buckling under lethal heat in Europe, and our own cognitive defenses being overwhelmed by synthetic digital realities.
These are systems built for the 20th century, violently colliding with the realities of 2026. The structures we rely on, both physical and civic, were designed for a world with different temperatures, different media, and different institutional guardrails. How societies build resilience when the ground is shifting on all these fronts simultaneously is the defining challenge of this decade. Thank you for joining us in this Clara Horatio Daily World Brief. For more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarahoratio.com.